Ue waire, waire runga, waire raro, waire ngangaru, waire, waire. Waire angaru nui angaru roa, waire kia tau mai te Māori, he Māori ora. He Māori tiaki mai nei te ora kaputa ia hānuku ia hārangi koia ko te hāora o te tangata. Ko wahaka ki, ko taringa ka mau, ko wānanga ka hua. Hoi rā e rongo whakairi ake ki runga kia tīna whāno whana ke tū mai te toki a haumi e. Hui e, tai ki e.
Kia ora. Welcome to the Whakapuāwai Podcast Series developed by the Centre for Indigenous Psychologies. During this series, we aim to deepen understandings about what Indigenous psychologies are and why they matter. Through our conversations with Indigenous people who are leaders in their areas of expertise, we will highlight how Indigenous psychologies are guiding, being incorporated into, and transforming ways of thinking and doing across a range of disciplines and applied areas. So join us on this journey as we delve into the varied worlds of Indigenous peoples and better appreciate how Indigenous psychologies are affecting positive change in Aotearoa, New Zealand and beyond. In this podcast, our Kairangahau Research Officer Lorena is privileged to sit down and chat with Dr Hinemoa Elder of Ngāti Kurī, Te Rarawa, Te Aupōuri and Ngāpuhi descent. Hinemoa is the mother of 2 adult children and has lived on Te Motu Aotearoa, Waiheke Island for more than 20 years. She graduated in 1999 and went on to specialise in child and adolescent psychiatry from the University of Auckland. Prior to that, she did her doctoral thesis entitled Tuku Iho He Tapu Te Upoko, which was completed at Massey University in 2012 and focused on the development of tikanga approaches for Māori children who experience traumatic brain injury. She is a child and adolescent psychiatrist who works at Starship Children's Hospital in the child and family and mother and baby units, as well as working in various community clinics. Hinemoa also provides youth forensic court reports and neuropsychiatric assessment and treatment of traumatic brain injury in private practice. She is a Deputy Psychiatry Member of the New Zealand Mental Health Review Tribunal. In 2019, Hinemoa was appointed a member of the New Zealand Order of Merit for services to psychiatry and Māori. More recently, Hinemoa has gifted our world with 2 taonga as the author of 2 books. The first was Aotearoa's best-selling local non-fiction book in 2021 and was entitled Aroha, Māori Wisdom for a Contented Life Lived in Harmony with Our Planet. The second book, Wawata, Moon Dreaming, Daily Wisdom Guided by Hina, the Māori Moon, was published in 2022. Please enjoy this kōrero between Lorena and Hinemoa.
Hinemoa, it is an honor to have you here. I could go on and on and on naming all the amazing things that you have done for your whānau, for Aotearoa and for all of us across the world. But just let me say that it is an absolute honor for the Centre for Indigenous Psychologies. It's an honor for me and for all of those that come with me, that are sitting here with us, to be with you and all of those that come with you. To start with, I wanted to ask you, why do you feel that elevating, recognizing Indigenous perspectives, acknowledging Māori knowledge, taonga and whakaaro is important in your mahi, in your life, and for Aotearoa in general?
Kia ora. Kei te mihi a hau ki a koe, ki a koutou katoa, hoi anō rā e noho anau i te roro o tōku whare, ko waimirirangi tērā. Whakarongo rua rā ku taringa ki te tai o pārengarenga e āki ana i te taha o tō mātou waka ko kura haupō tērā. Ka tētiro whakatiraki atu ki muri motu I hoki maharau ki tūmata hina me tana mahi e ora e te iwi, e ai ki aia. Te kuaka marangaranga, ko tahi manu e tau ki te tahuna, tau atu, tau atu, tau atu. Anei te tahi kuaka e mihi ana ki a koe, ki a koutou katoa. So that's kind of my answer to the question, e hoa. It's a bit like saying why is the Indigenous language and culture of the Pequot Nation important? Why is the language and culture of Japanese people in all their forms important? So the importance of the Māori culture, Māori language, Māori ways of thinking is a unique experience which comes from millennia of our tupuna, and it presents a whole system which is a different way of looking at the world, a different way of conceptualizing the world. And so for contemporary Māori, having gone through different phases of colonization and now facing some very, very real threats with the current political situation here in the end of 23, we are reminded yet again of the differences that our culture and our worldview, our mātauranga, our whakaaro, provides us in terms of how we survive in this world, how we know about who we are and our identities, how we describe ourselves. I think of this very much as within the umbrella term of taonga. We have been separated from the taonga of our language, our lands, all the aspects that taonga provide to ground us in a healthy sense of identity have been more or less removed, distorted, manipulated in some way by colonial structures and practices that live on today. And so we live with either some degree of awareness, and some of that might be quite hard to put into words, and some of it is easier to put into words, of that loss and of the grief associated with those losses of connection with our taonga, of those many facets. So that is my way of describing why our whole Māori worldview and all the things that are part of that are critical to our survival. These are not some sort of luxury things or packaging or add-ons. These are very much at the core of how we express who we are in contemporary times.
Oh, ngā mihi nui, Hinemoa. You're absolutely right. I think when you describe the absolute loss and the continuing fighting and struggle for survival and continuity of Indigenous knowledge in Aotearoa, you see that a lot of the attempts that have been done before, which were very tokenistic to simply incorporate in the margins to attach something Māori, are not real. They are not transformational. And what you're saying right now is, it is at the core of Aotearoa, is at the core of who we are. So it's not add-ons, it's not nice to have, it's not really nice packaging anymore. And it reminds me of a wonderful part of your book Wawata, where you talk about the mourning of the loss of not having grown immersed in that Māori ancestral understandings of Hina, for example, and how her guidance and lessons you would have loved to have, as you tupuna have. Can you tell us a little bit more about how Hina helped you to work through that mourning and that loss in Wawata?
Like so many of us, you know, I'm of a certain generation. So I'm 58 years old, and my children in their early 30s, and so I'm part of that continuum of different experiences of colonization. So my mum and our granddad and our grandmother, they were all beaten, shamed for attempts to speak te reo at school. And so they came into their period of parenthood of our generation with a whole lot of ideas about how they wanted to protect us, as you know, the best that they could do at that time. And so over the last few generations, people have felt they had to stop trying to be Māori, stop being Māori, and try to become more like Pākehā people. And so, you know, that was an attempt at that time. And I think what we realize now is that, you know, we feel aroha for those former generations who were doing their best to keep us safe. And yet they paid a high price for that. And they recognize, some of whom have survived, the ones who have survived can see that these next generations also paid a high price. So I didn't grow up with those things. I grew up knowing I was Māori, but I didn't grow up, for example, knowing what Hina's face was on any particular day. And that has come much, much later in my life. And so I think as you will have heard from other people about language trauma, which is another good specific example of this kind of experience, there are all sorts of emotional responses that come up when we begin to realize all the things that we've missed out on, and we have imaginings about our lives and how different our lives would have been if we had had access to those resources as we were growing up, if that was just completely normal. For example, you know, speaking Te Reo Māori from the first words, knowing all the things about Hina's faces around her orbit, knowing about the different atua, knowing about our tupuna stories, living in the same places that our tupuna lived. You know, these things sound simple enough, but when you think about the, you know, we use terms like, the urban drift and Māori came into the cities to find work, but let's just think about the actual practicalities of those things. So we haven't then lived on our ancestral lands. And what's usually happened with Māori is that we've lived in rental accommodation in areas of cities and towns which were more likely to have lots of pubs and pokie machines and shops selling sugary things, sugary drinks, schools that were not so well resourced. And so this perpetuated an experience of being Māori that was quite different from a much more privileged experience of being Pākehā in this country. And those aspects of our history have only recently really come to light. So I have had periods of deep mourning and grief around not only for myself, but for kind of all of this particular generation and the generations before me who were denied access to those really potent sources of connectivity, of knowing who you are and where you're from and that you're never alone. And lots of the kōrero that comes from our tupuna that you will see in my books, you know, he kāka noa hau iru, you know, I can never be lost, iru mai I rangiatea. I come from the poems of rangiatea. And so there's lots of very poetic sayings that help reorientate us to those really critical parts of our identity. I think one of the things that I notice in my work is that there's a lot of grief and loss that people can't really talk to because they're not sure where it comes from. And it's my sense that there is a layer of this aspect that is continuing to play out and manifest in different generations as we go along. And so attempts that can be made to, for example, return taonga from whare taonga around the world, return taonga from these places that we call museums from around the world, which host a lot of and hoard a lot of taonga Māori, which have been stolen or traded in some way under duress. These are the sorts of activities that also connect with knowledge about our atua, or our deities like Hina, like Papa, like Rangi. Mm-hmm. All of these activities form, I think, a site of resistance and a site of bringing forward the way to live and the way to understand how to live as Māori.
For me, seeing you as an incredible presence in these, in everything advocating, supporting, and being part of the continuity of Te Reo Māori, of Matauranga Māori. We've seen the decades of transformation that have been done by the amazing elders and thought leaders in Aotearoa. What do you think are the challenges that you see to continue growing this important mahi in Aotearoa?
Well, I think that we are facing one of the most critical challenges that we've faced, certainly in my lifetime, with the attack on Māori from the political systems that we have. I can't think of another way to phrase that. It does appear that so many of the critical aspects that have been fought so hard for are in danger of being wiped away with no ability to discuss and debate all the benefits that have been provided with, for example, Te Ora Whaiora, the Māori Health Authority. So much energy and effort and resources gone into that, and it's just at such an early phase that it needs time to deliver on all the work that's been put in already. I think that I'm just so gravely concerned about the current political landscape that we're in.
I completely agree.
Yes, and I think many people who live in Aotearoa are, and they're voicing those people who voted for some of the parties who are actually in the coalition government are expressing their grave concern. And I think for me, the multifaceted attacks on aspects of the environment, the potential for allowing oil and gas exploration and mining, alongside changing the smoking regulations, and using the tax that comes from selling cigarettes to give tax breaks to people who are wealthy. I mean, these things are so outrageous, and I think they challenging for example, the affirmative action of Māori and Pacific medical students, both at Auckland and Otago, is another example. Bringing back so-called boot camps, which we know are not effective for young Māori. It's just really concerning, really frightening, and we can carry on working as best we can within systems, but I think we're going to have to do something at the macro level to affect some kind of change systemically to prevent the erosion and the dismantling of the things that are working for our people.
I think it is now come clear that it is important for Pākehā, for Toi Ora, for everybody in Aotearoa to do something.
I think it's important for people to feel like everyone's voice matters. So, often we can feel overwhelmed. I know I do, about, well, what can we all do as individuals? And that's the key thing. And I think that speaks to the idea of Indigenous psychologies as well, because of course we, as Māori and many other cultures, are very much at the heart of the way that we see the world is about the collective and connectivity. Of course, we also recognise independence and autonomy and those kinds of ideas, but they're not at the centre, if you will, of our worldview and of our value system. And so at times of crisis like this, I think that's another reason why our whakaaro Māori is so potent and powerful, is because it does draw us together. It helps us to recognise that we must work collectively, we must plan and be strategic, we must utilise situations such as waitangi to highlight the concerns that we have, and to also ensure that our allies, our tangata tiriti, feel that they can voice their concerns to their own in a way, and we will voice our concerns to our own, who are in the coalition government, and to show that we have a very different way of thinking about what will work best and does work best in our country. So I think there's a whole range of things that we can do, and each person will tailor according to the energy that they have, because, you know, many people are struggling to survive, frankly, right now. So it's about choosing our moments, choosing our battles, choosing who are the people we can align with and the ways that we can align. A lot of people use social media, find that really effective. And it has been incredibly effective, actually, to see our young ones really voicing their fears, their experiences in the way that only they can. You know, I can't speak in the way that a 15-year-old or a 20-year-old can speak. And so I want them to speak in their way. Equally, they can't speak in the way that a 58-year-old woman from Muri Whenua can. So we as one of my aunties said, when I was actually up at home getting ready to ask permission actually to do my doctoral research about the He Taku Te Upoko, one of my aunties said, well, one of the great things about being Māori is that we all have a piece of the puzzle. We don't all have to do everything or know everything. We work together in concert and we each have a little part of the puzzle. How onto it is that? I was actually at a hui up home a couple of weeks ago, and I reminded her that she said that to me in 2010. And I said, thank you, Auntie, because you are right on point. I've never forgotten that.
The wisdom of our aunties is simply, you know, they can be around being all humorous and crack ups for ages, and then they come with these absolute gems of wisdom. It reminds me a lot of the book, as we were saying, the collaboration that you did with 6 Māori authors, Māori Health Transformations. And one of the reviewers was talking about how dominated by a very Western sense of psychology and clinical practice and everything else. How did you manage to work through those things in creating both these theses and then being part of the collaboration in the book?
Kia ora. It's a long story, and there were many parts to it. So I think, as I mentioned before, I was a jobbing doctor going through the psychiatric training program, and I spent a year as a senior registrar, which is when you've nearly finished your specialisation, at what's called consult liaison psychiatry at Starship Hospital, which is where you're in a psychiatric team that goes around all the wards in the hospital. For example, you will work with children who are having transplants, who are having cardiac surgery, who are having orthopedic surgery, who have cancer, and you're providing therapy and assessment of different kinds for these tamariki mokopuna and their whānau. And so one of the things that I noticed during that time was that I saw lots of tamariki with brain injuries and strokes, and I was really concerned that there was no manual, if you will. There was no tangible thing I could take off the shelf and go, well, here's all the tikanga, here's all the whakaro Māori that we can bring forward to support these tamariki mokopuna and their whānau. There was nothing. It was a sort of cultural desert. And I thought, well, that's really odd, because, you know, even in a very simple, humble family like my own, our mother had taught us about, well, the head is sacred, he tapu te upoko. Even though she was not someone who could speak te reo Māori, she imparted certain of these values and priorities. And so I thought, well, this seems like a real, there's such a need for this, maybe because I'm the only Māori at this time practicing child and adolescent psychiatry, I better create some resources. So that's when I went home to Te Kao, and I went home and had a wānanga at our marae there, a waimirirangi at Pōtahi, and asked permission of our whānau, including Auntie. And one of our kaumātua, Glass Murray, said to me, well, that sounds good, but I have a question for you. What's in it for us? And this is a great question. This is such a good question. So I said, well, good question, Uncle. Well, we can develop some tools that we have contributed to, and that I will bring them home first and offer them to our whānau here first and foremost, and we can continue to refine these tools, whatever they look like, and they belong to us. And so that was all good. He was happy with that. The whānau were happy with that. So off I went. And then another thing that I was incredibly honoured and blessed to have access to, Sir Mason Jury. I think I was one of his last PhD students. He was my second supervisor, and Professor Chris Cunningham, who was my first supervisor. And that combination was incredible. And I also had Professor Richard Fall as my external supervisor. So I had this extraordinary group of thinkers and caring people to reflect on the questions that I wanted to really delve into with the doctoral research. And I created a rōpū kaitiaki as well, which included people like Dame Nada Glavish, Amster Reedy, a neuropsychiatrist, Greg Finucane, to help guide me, because I knew that I needed to move forward as a rōpū and have plenty of people to bounce my ideas off. So it felt like a very safe and enriching environment to proceed. And then it was very clear to me that the methodology and the methods needed to be culturally meaningful and salient and safe. And so for me, the idea of being a manuhiri on a marae and going around marae around the country was a really appropriate way to engage with whānau about any kind of injury to the head and the brain. And so that's what I did, and it worked really well. And some of my kaitiaki, like Amster Reedy, said, oh, well, you're going to have to go to Rauru Marae on the East Coast. That's one of his marae, of course. And we also, so we went around the country. I went around 9 different marae. I wanted to also make sure I had spoken with whānau in rural and remote and urban marae to see if there were any differences or similarities. And the other thing about the design, which I talked to students about subsequently, because of course I'm really keen to support anybody to engage in this sort of applicable research that can really help us with our daily practice, is to think about how you make sure that your findings are robust. So one of the things I did was I went back to each marae a second time and I said, look, this is what you told me the first time. Did I hear you correctly? Was there anything we missed, or you felt you couldn't say last time, or do you want to correct anything? And then I created these little pūrākau to sort of test some of the ideas a little bit in a scenario about how we could use these ideas to help a tamariki mokopuna in a story. So those are just some of the methodological approaches that I used that I think were helpful to guide me on that journey and made it a stepwise process. And of course, you know, when you're doing this sort of rangahau, I wanted to make sure that whatever the process was and whatever the findings were, that they could withstand critique from our old people, first and foremost, and also from the academy. So I needed to be able to publish papers. I also needed to stand on the marae and be able to speak with my own whānau in particular, who are your most harshest critics. And that's wonderful. And we absolutely expect that, and we want that. And to speak to other Māori communities around the country and to hear, you know, how they are receiving this sort of work and whether this is the sort of thing that they find relevant. So that pretty much sums up the doctoral part. And what came out of the doctoral part was the sort of key themes and an idea about beginning to develop a cultural assessment tool. And that was the postdoc. So it's a very long-winded answer to your question, and I've probably gone completely off topic.
Never. When we're telling stories together, when we are building stories together, there's never all going off topic. I really love when you were saying, you know, the tikanga in rangahau and how it needs to be first and foremost checked and revised and agreed and blessed by our elders, our communities, our people, before any academic can touch on those things.
One of the dangers I think a lot of us face is that as researchers from different cultures, different Indigenous cultures, we have to be very careful about not being used for other people's kaupapa. And I think in this era of research about AI, research about digital people, research that is really in that realm of digital technology, and that's moving so quickly, that actually Indigenous researchers, Indigenous practitioners have a lot of information that is extremely valuable to these global groups who want to do these kinds of research, who want to explore this kind of research. So I think we're in a new era of caution. As you said before, when I did my PhD, and I got my PhD in 2012, it was still, I don't think that there was a lot of activity, certainly that I was aware of at that time, around, for example, artificial intelligence research. Now, this is a major accelerating powerhouse of research. And as Indigenous researchers who have some experience with what we might call, as you guys call, Indigenous psychologies, ways of thinking, this is incredibly valuable to these people, and they may not have they may not be Indigenous. Mostly they're not. They perhaps are not aligned at all with Indigenous aspirations or goals. So I think we have to be incredibly careful about how we might be used for other people's agendas.
As you said, such a rapidly moving world of AI, where knowledge is not treated with that sacredness, with that aroha, with that care anymore. It is simply something to be sold and co-opted. Hinemoa, I wanted to ask you in relation to the work that you've done, obviously in academia and then in practice. What does a healthy mental health system looks like to you?
Well, a healthy mental health system here in Aotearoa, to me, is run by and designed by Māori. That is the absolute bottom line.
Yes.
I think that, maybe it sounds a little bit of a hackneyed phrase, and I'm sure we could debate it another time, that, what works for Māori can work for others. I think we do have leadership models, and I have lived experience as a psychiatrist of this. So I worked for Hauora Waikato in Kiriroa in Hamilton for 4 years. And that is a massive mental health service, multifaceted mental health service that came out of Tokonui and went through all the kinds of challenges that kaupapa Māori institutions go through, over auditing by government departments, really having to cobble together contracts to keep going over periods of time, and gradually growing in strength and the ability to actually deliver what works for Māori. And so it must have been around 2007, there was a radical shift in the Waikato area in how the funding planning people organise things. And so what they decided to do was that they gave the whole needs assessment part for child and adolescent mental health to Hauora Waikato. So any person of any ethnicity who was referred by a GP, by a school, by their own whānau, by another part of the health system, their mental health needs were assessed by us. And then if they needed secondary mental health services, they had some choices, because we had some contracts for our own child and adolescent mental health service. We also had an early intervention service for people who were developing psychotic illnesses. And we also had some perinatal mental health services. So those were the ones that I was mostly involved with. And then, of course, the forensic service came on stream. The youth forensic service came on stream soon after that too. So what we found was that we were kind of what's the phrase? We were so good at assessing these whānau of any ethnicity that the non-Māori ones, as well as the Māori ones who needed to come through and be seen for further treatment, they wanted to stick with the Māori services. And they, we heard time after time, we really like the officers, they're really lovely, they're really homely, you're always so generous, we always have a kai, we always have, we have a very specific way of delivering everything we do in a Māori way, which was appreciated by people of all ethnicities. And so I hold that experience dear to my heart, because I can say, look, it does feel better for people other than Māori. And so that's why I say that a really healthy mental health system is Māori run, Māori designed, Māori governed. The other thing I would say is that we would also not have this kind of split, mind-body split going on. The mind-body split is not is an idea. It's not a reality that any of us live, actually. We don't go around going, oh, is that my mind? Is that my body? Well, if we do, it's because we've been carefully taught to think like that.
Yes.
But actually our minds and bodies are woven together intimately. And so actually a healthy system of response to what people are needing, whether the symptoms or signs or experiences that people are expressing first and foremost seem to come from their thoughts and feelings or from their bodies or a mixture of both, we wouldn't be stigmatizing the things that come from the mind, from the emotions or behavior, and going, oh, that's probably because you have some sort of weakness, or, we wouldn't be giving people signals that this is some sort of problem in their character, but we would be very open, because we'd be coming at it from a cultural worldview. So I think there's some fundamental things that would be different. The other thing that would be different is that we would not only use individual clinical documentation. We would use documentation that is collaborative, that is documented alongside, so not by the health professional alone, that is documented and held by whānau, so that whānau are in charge, and we have plenty of technological options currently available, which would allow whānau to determine who gets to see what, under what circumstances, and that information is shared and held in a sort of health information matrix, if you like, that people can look into that diamond from different perspectives, depending on their roles and responsibilities within whānau. And that would address the major problem that we have of these individual clinical records, which, they do serve a purpose, they work to a certain extent, but they also have major limitations. They do reinforce the idea that we are all somehow islands, even though in Pākehā culture they say, no man is an island, no woman, no person of any gender is an island. But of course, in much of what we do practically, we treat people as if they are separate data points, when the reality is we know that we are connected, whether we like it or not. We have whānau, we have these relationships. And so how we find smart and culturally meaningful ways to collect our health data in groups, I think that would be another component in our exemplary health system.
In Aroha, in your book, you have wonderful whakatauki. There's 52 of them, and they are really exciting to read. And one of them says, "E naki ana amua e koutou mai ana amuri." First clear the weeds, then plant. And in here, you share the concept of wairua, and also you tell us about that interconnectedness of mind, body, wairua. How do you describe wairua for those that may not understand what that means?
I think this is a really critical point, because I think a lot of people are quite scared to speak to write about, to discuss the Wairua dimension, because they feel like, oh, well, I'm not a kaumātua, that's not my area of expertise. And that's, yeah, it is tricky. So in essence, what I talk about is that this is our experience of connectivity with everything in the universe. And so some people call it spirituality because it has this deep, profound, sacred sense to it. When you think about how connected we are, when you think about the fact that actually rākau, trees and birds and all the things in our environment are our relations, we are related to all of these things, then it kind of gives you a whole different concept of when you feel connected to that, what does that mean for your well-being? So, and when you feel a disruption of that connectivity, what that means for your well-being. So I think that's how I go about it, and that seems to work okay. So Aroha to me is this energy that is, we can feel it coming up out of the ground. We can feel it in our senses when we look at the beautiful natural world around us, or when we look at the destruction of the world around us. We feel a sense of wanting to protect, of wanting to fight for what is right. This is Aroha. When we sense something is wrong, or when we sense a deep soulful connection or passion, when we feel aroused, when we feel excited and driven and passionate about some kaupapa, this is also Aroha. So Aroha has many shades, and so that's how I think of this concept of Aroha. And it's interesting, isn't it, how we can almost by default start to ease into the idea of, we can talk about Aroha and then we start talking about love, as if we're still talking about Aroha, which we're not.
Yeah.
And I think we can run into that problem when we use, for example, the whare tapawhā from our beloved tā Mason, because I have seen so many and heard so many times people talking about o te whare tapawhā, it's about whānau, it's about hinengaro, it's about wairua, it's about tinana. But then they kind of they've done that with the Māori words, and they start talking about, so that's about the body and the mind and the family and some kind of spiritual thing. And so we've suddenly ditched all the Māori concepts, and we're just referencing the English words after that. And I think we have to be really, really careful about that, because that's not whare tapawhā. Whare tapawhā is not the 4 English words. It is these really different concepts that come from a completely different worldview.
You write about how for you as a psychiatrist, hinengaro is at the center of what you do and your work every day. Can you tell us a little bit more about the relationship between Hina and hinengaro?
Well, I think that's a really interesting question. We could have several wānanga on that alone. So I think hinengaro is personified. And so that's another reason why she's quite different from the other 3 facets of the whare tapawhā, which Tā Mason articulated. So for me, she's also in a different category. When you think about hinengaro, and many different iwi have their own classification systems and ideas about hinengaro, and certainly in the north we have one where she has 21 different caves or storage areas where she has different areas of working and priority and sustenance. So hinengaro is a huge topic. And if you think about, well, without hinengaro, we couldn't even conceive of the whole of whare tapawhā. I often talk about hinengaro as also being able to take us in this sort of time travel. You know, so when I was doing a little bit of my pepeha before, talking about being in the roro, which is the veranda or the porch of the whare, also the word for brain, which I think is really interesting, because when we sit in the whare nui, we are sitting in the body of the ancestor, right? So the head is at the front. And so when I was speaking those words before, I was actually taking us all there. We all went there together, didn't we? Hinengaro, she has that quality of time and space travel. So we all actually went to Te Kao there for a few minutes, and we listened to the parengarenga, and we listened to the waves, and we saw Kurahaupo, the waka, and we looked across to Murimotu, and we saw Tūmata Hina, who rescued our people. And one of the ways he did that, and Hinengaro allows us to engage with ancient expeditions and incidents and experiences of our people, and we can be there with Tūmata Hina as he looks up and sees the kuaka and goes, hey, brilliant. If I talk to my people about these kuaka and how, look, they're flying around, but when it's safe, one lands and the others follow, and that's how we're going to escape. And he paints that picture for the people, and then they're captured by that idea, and they can have belief in that idea, in his leadership, and then they follow that. And then I said to you, and so I'm greeting you as another kuaka. I'm greeting you as another godwit. So these are the ways that Hinengaro allows us to navigate and flow and experience these different things all at once. So we went back in time, we thought about the future, and we thought about right now, all in a few moments. So that's a bit about Hinengaro. And then Hina, who's out there, Papa Tuanuku's bestie, right? So she's coming around, she keeps her same face to her friend the whole time, she doesn't turn away ever, she's got the same face, and what an incredibly beautiful relationship. And this is a relationship that I don't think is talked about much. Papa Tuanuku and Hina, their connectivity and how they are predictably there for each other, even though there's the changing all around the month. It's a predictable change. You can come back to the same change next month. So the influence that Hina has on the whole system, and how the reciprocity, if you like, between how we can use Hinengaro allows us to think about all the different influences of Hina, and also Hina's influence on Hinengaro. So it's not all one-way traffic. So there's a lot for Hinengaro to do when we are conceiving of these things.
Oh, she's, as you said, we could have several wanang on there. It's wonderful. Thank you for sharing that kōrero about both of them. I've been captivated by their writings on Hinengaro, and looking at that through the book in Wawata, that you talked about not only the faces of the moon, but you talked about the phrases of the moon, and talked about how they compose a waiata song, a haka. Can you take us briefly through your understanding of Hina's musical phrases?
Sure. Look, and this is something that I have, this is an idea of my own, just to be really clear. This is not something that has come from ancient times. This has really come out of my own writing in maramataka, in okoro, and wanting to find a way to remember the different names and to remember the kinds of energies that I have experienced. And so it seemed to me that this musical metaphor made sense. So for me, the beginning, we start at whiro, so that's the new moon, darkness. That's the Great Reset. And the whakaeke, if you've ever been to Te Matatini, or you've been to the regionals, or Tamarara, or one of those different competitions in different areas for our kapas, then you will see that the entry onto the stage is called the whakaeke, and it's the same word that we use for entering onto the marae ātea, right? So that's the first sort of grouping, and that's the first 5 of our faces of Hina, and then we move into a more turbulent phase. That's the tamatea moons, and I thought that the motiatea chanting dirge kinds of songs that come next in the way that those brackets are organized really made sense to understand the kinds of energies that we might experience over that time. And then after the tamatea moons, we move into a waiataringa phase where we're thinking about movement, and movement from the tiniest movements of like the breath and the way that the heart muscles move, the heart muscle moves, and the cells of the heart are connected to each other differently. For example, how we experience visual stimuli through the eye into the back of the brain is something that I thought made sense around Aotearoa. And then we, at the end of that phase, we're really coming into a time which is well recognized as being a really high octane energy time, a lot of sexual energy, a lot of, you could say, orgasmic energy at that time of our month. And thinking about fertility, you know, the names of the moons of Hina's faces give us some clues there. And then we come into Poi. We've got Rako Nui, Rako Matohi. Those are two kind of twin-like moons. And as I was working this out, just to help myself really, to start with, and my close female friends, I was amazed. I was thinking, wow, this actually really fits together, because we've got these two celestial poi that we see. And then we come into the haka period, which is, again, there's a lot of a driving sense of energy, but things are driving down in terms of the stepwise experiences that we might have at that time. And then into the kōrero moons, which you talked about before, kōrero pirikitanga roa. And then we come into the final part, the whakawātea, which is the kind of leaving the stage. We are saluting all the great atua, as Te Rangi Hiroa called them, the departmental gods, and saying farewell in that way, and then coming to a close at Motu Whenua. So just a brief kind of overview of just my own thoughts around how to try to make sense and use music, which is often something super, super helpful. It doesn't put pressure on ourselves to try to remember things in an achievement-related way. That gives us the freedom to use our creative minds to help us shape those different aspects of the month. The great thing about the circular orbital journey that we can go through with Hina every month is that we don't have to be perfect. We don't have to get everything right, because guess what? We get to go around again and again and again and again. And she's going to come back just like she comes around Papa. She comes around us and she goes, hey, whatever happened last month, I'm back. It's in the diary. We're going to try that again. This is, again, a sense of the whakaaro Māori in the world, which is different to whakaaro Pākehā, which is you have to be perfect, you have to get it right every time. Otherwise, what does that mean about you as a person? Oh, it means you're a failure, you're not good enough. All those sorts of thoughts that can kick in. This is a very different Indigenous psychology, if you will. This is a very different, again, exemplar of how in Te Ao Māori, this is about, there's a time and place for things, and we get to try again. There is always an opportunity to evolve, to grow our learning and understanding, because we're all part of that tupuna line. We are those representatives from those who've gone before, and we hand on to our mokopuna. So there's lots and lots of opportunities to learn. It makes sense, right? Because when people had to survive, why would you say, well, that's it, you failed last month, you're out. That you need to provide much more opportunity for people to grow and to continue to learn over the lifespan. And I suppose that was another thing that I wanted to bring forward, and particularly in the Wawata book, is for us as wahine, that, we grow and we change, and there are different lessons to learn from Hina, from Hinengaro, all the way along.
Oh, Ngā mihi Hinemoa. It takes me back to our Indian beliefs that, Pachamama, which you call Papa Tuanuku here, she's the cosmic mother, so she is time and space, both the creator of itself, the creator of everything, and absolutely has never been defined in a linear way. It's always this beautiful spiral sense of repetition and growth and self-creation and recreation, and it really makes sense when you were saying, we go back next month, here we are again. Here we are, Mama. Here we are again, Mama. What do I have to learn this time? And I think when you were talking about Hina being that loyal, beautiful friend of Papa Tuanuku, it's like that. She follows her around and makes sure that we have that light every time that we reach the next spiral, and we shouldn't be scared of the next spiral.
No, definitely not. And I think that's another difference in terms of whakaaro Māori is we have other ways of respecting papa and rangi and tangaroa and being safe within their embrace, if you will. And our tapua noa keeps us safe. That's the sort of ancient health and safety regulations and spiritual regulations that keep us on track, knowing our realm and the other realms. And of course, there have always been people who have this exquisite esoteric knowledge. That's not what I'm talking about. That is a different level again. So we're talking about ordinary people living ordinary lives with this different appreciation that the Indigenous worldview just gives you a whole different lens on life.
It really does. To close off, Hinemoa, what are your hopes for the future?
Well, my hopes for the future are that we find a way to navigate back to a society which is centered around our tamariki mokopuna and not around money and profit and greed and power. Because societies that focus on the needs, the emotional, the physical, the spiritual, creative learning needs of our tamariki mokopuna, those are the societies that are going to flourish in the next chapter of human existence on the planet. And I think without that, we are in grave danger, aren't we? Because of climate emergency and all sorts of other horrible and horrifying political beliefs playing out around the world.
Thank you, Hinemoa. I thank you for this kōrero, for the gifts that you keep on giving to our world, for following Hina's travels. I remember the whakataiki that you shared in the Aroha book, and I think you mentioned a little bit about it just before. E kore au e ngaro he kākano ahau I ruia mai I rangiatia. You can never be lost. You're a seed sown from rangiatia. So you have a reason for being, and the amazing work, the dedication to your clients, to your whānau, to te ao Māori, to te reo Māori, to Aotearoa, to Indigenous peoples all across the world, to wahine and to women across the world, tells me that seed has flourished into the most incredible, strong rako who holds much wisdom and who sustains many more. Ngā mihi nui e te rangatira. Thank you very, very, very much for your gifts today and the gifts that you keep on sharing with the world.
Hoi nō rā, a hei whakakapi māku, e ai ki te kōrero, Ki te kotahi te kākaho ka whati, ki te kapuia e kore e whati. So that's a famous whakatauaki from Kingi Tāwhiao, and he's reminding us that when we grow alone, like the kākaho reads, we're vulnerable, but when we grow together, we are invincible. Ngā mihi nui ki a koe, kia koutou katoa.
Unuhia, te tapu nui kia wātea. Wātea i runga, wātea i raro, wātea i waho, wātea i roto, ka wātea, ka wātea. Ka wātea kia i o te noho kia māma, te noho kia ora, te noho. Ko e rā e rongo whakairi ake ki runga kia tīna, aumi e, hui e, tai ki e.